Jason Rantz, Seattle radio talk show host, joining me now. And Jason, in addition to the crime spike that you've seen in your own city, you're also seeing the talk of what life is going to be like if they take away more cops.
Absolutely. Just listening to the Democrat spin here. Look, I'm all for good spin if it's actually good spin. This is awful, and it has some political implications because, number one, I think we all recall after the last election and the Democrats didn't do as well as they thought they would in the House elections, there was that call within the caucus, and it got heated because they were saying the defund movement actually hurt. Cedric Richmond, who is now claiming that Republicans are defunding the police, he was on another network a year ago claiming that the defund movement was hurting Democrats, and they have to get away from that kind of messaging. So the Democrats that they're trying to convince we're not responsible for this, they're not going to buy it, and they're going to look at some of the Republican alternatives. At the same time, you've got the progressive movement that does, in fact, want to defund or abolish, now again looking at the Democratic Party and saying, you don't actually represent me, and that might mean they don't end up voting for some of these Democrats in the tighter races.
Dim on dim political push, right?
Yep.
Hey, look, I want to get to this because I think this is important to note. When the White House makes the argument that Republicans are to blame because they didn't vote for the stimulus bill, Jen Psaki at the lectern in the White House said yesterday, the fact is the American Rescue Plan was something that Republicans, not a single one, voted for, which our plan allowed state and local governments to replenish their police departments and do the other things that are needed. It allowed for it, that the municipalities still have the choice not to allocate that money to hire more police. And in many instances, Jason, as we know, they are Democrat cities, Democrat-led cities that are going through this crime spike, and they're already talking or doing defund. So why does Jen Psaki or the White House, why would they float something like that out there? Because they don't control how the cities spend their cash that they would get from that bill. Not on this.
Yeah, but people don't realize that. I think they're talking and trying to get a talking point in front of the people who don't actually realize that. Despite the fact that, yes, you could have used it, but that also means you could have chosen not to use it. And when we're talking about the defund the police movement in the major cities, Democrat-led, that are dealing with this crime surge, they didn't use the funds for policing. I'm in a city that is currently still trying to defund the police. So this idea, what we're seeing right now, I think, is Democrats are just trying to throw up a whole bunch of different talking points against the wall and see what sticks. The problem is, oftentimes it's conflicting with one another because last week, let's remember, the Biden administration would have you believe that unscrupulous gun dealers are illegally selling ghost guns to white nationalists, and that's the actual threat. While at the same time now they're saying, oh no, the defund movement, we had nothing to do with it, although they also said defund movement didn't actually happen and more police departments across the country got higher funding. It's maddening. It's dizzying.
I want to get to this because, we've got some cities that are in the top 5, top 10 for violence, and New York is, one of them. The New York PD just released new video of a suspect in that Times Square shooting who injured a 21-year-old Marine who was visiting the city with his family.
Yeah.
The New York Post cover today reads, "Crosshairs of the World. Outrage, a city fails to protect tourist Mecca from gun chaos. And of course, that's a play on words for crossroads of the world. And an op-ed argues the shooting is what happens when you don't police the little stuff. Jason, I've heard you say this before.
Absolutely. When you have people who are doing small crimes and they go unpunished, well, guess what? They graduate to more significant crimes. They continue down this path towards more violence. And a lot of times we're talking about younger men who end up turning towards gangs because they don't have people in their lives who care about them. And so they are getting taken advantage of by older people within this movement who then push them into these types of crimes. I mean, look, this is really how defunding the police has hurt. And I've got a piece up right now at foxnews.com of, when you defund the police, it means you're not staffing them correctly, which means they're not patrolling neighborhoods on foot, on bike, in their cars. And when you don't have any kind of police presence, you give an opportunity for this kind of crime to take place.
It's the broken windows argument, right? Like if there's not a cop standing there, it's not that he necessarily would prevent you from doing something, but it's a huge deterrent. And when you take away that deterrent, that cop's presence, you get what you're talking about. Real quickly, growing pushback now after Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called concerns about rising crime overblown.
we are seeing these headlines about percentage increases. Now, I want to say that any amount of harm is unacceptable and too much. But I also want to make sure that this hysteria, that this doesn't drive a hysteria, and that we look at these numbers in context so that we can make responsible decisions about what to allocate in that context.
Hysterical, she calls us, for covering the stories. Well, we're going to cover it anyway, no matter what she calls us. Yeah. Critics are unleashing on this. The Federalist's Chris Bedford tweeted this: the biggest spike in violent crime since the United States started keeping records is not hysteria. It's real, and so are its victims. This is shameful. A Fox News contributor, Joe Concha, tweeted, the people living in her district who are afraid to even put their kids outside don't concur. Jason.
Yeah, it goes a degree hotter than it should, and she says we're all going to die from global warming in 10 minutes. And so she's talking about hysteria. Let's be clear. When you can afford to pay for your own security and live in an apartment that has some security built in, you probably don't have to worry about some of this. But how about AOC talk to some of the actual victims and tell me if their stories don't matter? We are very clearly seeing a rise in crime. They can deny it all they want, but they're going to do it to the detriment of their own political career. Now, maybe this doesn't hurt AOC specifically because of her district, but it does hurt the Democratic Party. And so I suppose the glass half full look at this is that we will hopefully have more Republicans in office who will actually pursue a tough on crime approach. The Democratic approach is not working. It's killing people, and the voters are smart enough to realize that.
Jason Rantz, thank you so much always for joining the program.
Thanks, Harris.